Welcome to Sanctuary Stories, the podcast where we explore the incredible journeys of people seeking sanctuary and the remarkable contributions they've made to the world. I'm Phil, and in each episode we share a life of someone who has not only survived displacement, but turned pain into purpose and struggle into strength. Today's story is about a girl who left everything behind, her home, her classroom, even her country, yet carried with her one thing she refused to surrender, her education. She would grow up to become a global advocate, the youngest UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador in history, and a voice for millions of children displaced by war. This is the story of Muzoon Almellehan, the refugee who refused to stop learning, and in doing so, taught the world that education can rebuild what conflict destroys. Before her name appeared in newspapers and speeches, the UN, Muzoon, was simply a bright, curious girl growing up in Dara, South Syria. Her father, Rakan, was a school headmaster, a patient man with ink-stained hands and a quiet belief that education could lift a nation. Her mother, Khadija, taught Arabic literature and believed words could change hearts. Their home was filled with books, laughter, and the smell of cardamom tea. Muzoon remembers sitting cross-legged on the carpet, practicing her handwriting, while her father marked papers. When she got a word wrong, he'd smile and say, "Mistakes are just the first step to understanding." Life was ordinary, safe, and full of plans. She wanted to be a journalist, perhaps a writer, someone who could tell stories that mattered. In 2011, the first protests began. Within months, everything she knew started to fall apart. Gunfire echoed across Dara's streets. Tanks rolled past school gates. Friends stopped coming to class. And one day, she arrived to find her school reduced to rubble. The chalkboards were cracked, and the air smelled of smoke. Her father stood beside her and said, "We can rebuild walls, but if we lose our learning, we lose ourselves." Within weeks, the family was forced to flee. They took only what they could carry, a few documents, a blanket, and Muzoon's school bag. Crossing the border was terrifying. Night after night, they moved through checkpoints, hearing distant bombs. They finally reached Jordan. They were taken to Za'atari refugee camp, a vast expanse of white tents in the desert, ringed with barbed wire. At its peak, Za'atari housed more than 100,000 Syrians. Rows of containers stretched for miles. Every morning, dust rose like smoke from the ground. People queued for water, for bread, and news from home. Muzoon was 13. For the first time, she was a refugee. The family's tent was small and leaked when it rained, but inside her father hung a sign scribbled in Arabic, "Education is our future." Those 4 words became their daily prayer. Classes in the camp were sparse. Too few teachers, too many students. Yet Muzoon walked for hours each day to attend them. She sat on a plastic chair under a flapping tarpaulin roof, copying notes in a notebook that she guarded like treasure. What broke her heart was seeing how many girls never showed up. Families terrified for their daughters' safety or struggling to survive, married them off early. At 13 or 14, they were wives, not students. One evening, Muzoon asked her mother, "Why should being a girl mean we must stop learning?" Her mother replied, "Then you must be the one who shows them otherwise." And so she did. Each day after school, Muzoon knocked on doors, pleading with parents to keep their daughters in class. She spoke quietly but with fire in her eyes. Sometimes she was turned away. Sometimes mothers wept and nodded. Bit by bit, girls returned. Soon, UNICEF staff took notice. They invited her to speak at community meetings inside the camp. For the first time, she stood before a crowd and said, "If we lose our education, we lose everything. We have already lost our homes. Let's not lose our future." Her voice shook at first, but people listened. A 14-year-old girl had become the camp's strongest advocate for education. In 2015, after 2 years in Zaatari, Muzoon's family received the news that would change their lives. They were to be resettled in the United Kingdom through the government's Syrian Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme. When the plane touched down at Newcastle Airport, she looked out the window and saw a landscape unlike anything she'd ever known. Wet streets, rolling green hills, and a sky the colour of steel. It was March and the cold bit through her thin coat. The volunteers who met them smiled warmly, holding handmade signs that said "Welcome to Newcastle." For the first time in years, there was no fear of bombs, no distant gunfire, just the soft hum of rain on car windows as they drove to their new home. The house was small but safe. It had solid walls, a working heater, and a door that locked from the inside. For many families, those details might seem trivial, but for the Almellehans, they meant freedom. Still, the adjustment wasn't easy. For Muzoon, everything felt unfamiliar. The food, the language, the rhythm of daily life. The people were kind, but she often felt like she was living between two worlds. One she could no longer return to, and one that didn't yet feel like hers. Her father would wake early, making strong Arabic coffee that filled the house with the smell of home. Her mother tried to recreate Syrian dishes with ingredients she'd never used before. Couscous instead of bulgur, lemons instead of sumac. It was a way of holding on to who they were, even as they learned to belong somewhere new. When Muzoon started at her local school, she was terrified. The classrooms were quiet. Students spoke quickly in accents she struggled to understand. She remembers sitting at her desk, heart racing and able to follow what the teacher was saying. The first few weeks were the hardest. She missed her friends from Zaatari, missed the sound of Arabic around her, missed the warmth of the desert sun. There were nights when she sat awake, feeling like she'd left not just her country, but a piece of herself behind. But Muzoon was determined. She knew why she had come, to learn, to build a life, and to use her voice. Every evening she practiced English by writing down words she'd heard at school. She labelled objects around the house: door, window, book, light. When she didn't know how to pronounce something, she asked her teachers the next day, no matter how embarrassed she felt. Slowly things began to change. Her classmates started inviting her to join their groups. One girl lent her a dictionary. Another sat with her at lunch and taught her how to pronounce difficult words like through and though. She remembers the day she gave her first short presentation in class. Her hands were trembling, her voice shaking. But when she finished, her teacher smiled and said, "You did beautifully." That simple kindness gave her a confidence she had never felt before. Outside the classroom, she began to discover the city. She loved the bridges that spanned the River Tyne, the quiet libraries and the bus rides through the drizzle where she'd press her forehead against the glass and think about how far she'd come. She started volunteering with local youth groups, helping other Syrian families settle in. When she spoke about her experience in Zaratari, people listened. Teachers, journalists, and community leaders were moved by her story, not just because of the hardship she faced, but because of her fierce belief that education was the key to everything. Bit by bit, Muzoon found her voice again. When the BBC first interviewed her in Newcastle, she was nervous, but her message was clear. I want to tell young people, especially girls, that education is our strength. It's what gives us a future. Her confidence grew, and so did her reach. Invitations started arriving, first from local schools and then from conferences in London and Brussels. By the time she spoke at her first UNICEF panel, her English flowed effortlessly. At one point, an audience member asked her what the hardest part of starting over had been. She paused for a long time before replying, "Learning that safety doesn't mean forgetting who you are." She explained that the hardest challenge wasn't the language or the culture, it was reconciling her new life with the memories of her old one. She didn't want to erase her identity as a Syrian refugee, she wanted to honour it. The balance became the foundation of her activism. She often says that the UK gave her safety, but education gave her purpose. In Britain, she could finally dream again. She finished school with excellent grades, went on to university, and began to study international politics. Her goal was clear: to work for the rights of children who had been silenced by war. When she became UNICEF's youngest ever Goodwill Ambassador, at just 19, she stood on stage in front of cameras and dignitaries, wearing a blue UNICEF scarf over her shoulders. The hall erupted with applause as she began to speak. Her voice was calm and steady. I know what it's like to lose everything. I know what it's like to study in a tent with no books, no electricity, and no hope. But I also know what it's like to be given a chance. Education gave me back my life, and now I want to make sure every child gets the same chance I did. That speech marked the beginning of a new chapter. The shy girl from Dara had become a global advocate. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was leading. But even as her platform grew, Muzoon never forgot the early days in Newcastle, the long walks to school, the evenings studying by lamplight, the moments of loneliness that almost broke her. When she visits new refugee arrivals now, she tells them, "It's okay to feel lost. It's okay to feel scared. What matters is that you keep going." She tells young girls especially that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to act anyway. Her life in the UK has become a bridge between worlds, the old and the new, the war-torn and the safe, the child who fled and the woman who returned to help others find home. And that bridge, built on words, education and faith, has become her greatest strength. As a UNICEF ambassador, Muzoon travelled to refugee camps in Chad, Nigeria and South Sudan. She visited schools built from shipping containers and sat in classrooms without roofs, listening to children who still dream of a different life. She spoke at the United Nations General Assembly in New York, at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and the European Parliament. Everywhere she goes, she delivers the same message. Education is not a luxury for times of peace. It is necessity in times of war. Her words carry a quiet authority. No anger, no politics, just truth. When you teach a child, you don't just change their life, you change their world. Her advocacy has helped influence funding for the Education Cannot Wait programme, the first global fund dedicated to education in emergencies. She's met students from Ukraine, Sudan, Afghanistan, and Yemen, reminding them that their dreams matter. She often tells them about the little tent in Zaatari where her story began, and about the girls who sat beside her, studying under a single light bulb hanging from a wire. Her efforts have earned her a place on Time's 30 Most Influential Teens, BBC's 100 Women, and numerous humanitarian awards. But for Muzoon, the real reward is simpler. Every time a child returns to school. She still remembers the girl she helped in Zaatari, the one whose father agreed to delay marriage after hearing Muzoon speak. Years later, that girl sent a message. Because of you, I'm a teacher now. And there was another boy, Yusuf, who had stopped attending classes because he needed to work for food. When Muzoon met him years later in Jordan, he handed her a small notebook and said, "I kept this because you told me never to stop writing." These stories remind her why she keeps going, because change begins one child at a time. Muzoon often says that war taught her the value of peace, but education taught her the power of hope. She knows that millions of children are still out of school today in Syria, Sudan, Ukraine, and beyond, and she has vowed to speak for them until every child has a place to learn. Her work isn't just about books and teachers, it's about restoring dignity and possibility. When she talks about education, she isn't talking about grades, she's talking about freedom. Education is the passport to freedom, she once said. It took me from a tent in the desert to speaking at the United Nations, and it can do the same for millions of others. Muzoon Almellehan is not just a refugee. She is a leader, a teacher, and a symbol of what happens when one voice refuses to be silenced. Her story proves that you don't need a podium or a title to change the world. You just need conviction. She reminds us that education is not a gift we give, it's a right we must protect. She reminds us that behind every refugee statistic is a child with a dream, and she reminds us that sanctuary is not only about safety, it's about belonging, purpose, and hope. "I lost my home," she once said, "but I never lost faith in education. It's what saved me, and it can save others too." Her story shows that even in the darkest moments, there are lights that refuse to go out, and sometimes those lights come from the youngest hearts. That's it for this episode of Sanctuary Stories. Next week, we'll share another extraordinary journey, another voice that reminds us what humanity, courage, and hope can achieve, even in the hardest of times. If you've been inspired by Muzoon's story, I encourage you to read more about her work with UNICEF and the global movement for education in emergencies. Visit unicef.org to learn how you can help children still waiting for a classroom of their own. And if this episode moved you, please share it. Every listen, every share, and every conversation helps keep those voices alive. A huge thank you to Soulful Jam Tracks for our music. You'll find full artist credits, links, and references in the episode description. If you like to support Sanctuary Stories, please like, subscribe, and leave a review. It really does help others discover these powerful stories. Until next time, keep striving, keep thriving, and keep believing in the power of education to change the world.